The Rusty Anchor was loud tonight, the kind of off-base bar outside Camp Pendleton where the music shook the floorboards and Marines bragged louder than the speakers. Neon lights cut across the crowded room as Corporal Jenna Hale sat alone at a corner table, jeans, boots, and a plain black shirt blending her into the background. Her drink sat untouched. She didn't sip, didn't move, didn't react, just watched the room with steady eyes that noticed everything.
Staff Sergeant Brody Kane noticed her. Tall, loud, and full of the kind of confidence that grows after too many deployments and too many drinks, he swaggered toward her with a smirk. He called her tiny, asked if she was lost, and wondered if she was even active duty. The Marines around him laughed when he nudged her stool with his boot, trying to jolt her. Jenna didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. That stillness irritated him more than any insult could. He stepped closer, invading her space, trying to tower over her. Conversations around them slowed. A few Marines leaned in, sensing something was shifting in the air. What happened next would silence the entire bar. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military Stories and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. Jenna Hale was 28, and at first glance looked like the kind of sailor nobody remembered 5 minutes after seeing her. Active duty Navy, yes, but the kind people mentally filed under admin or support. The ones who worked somewhere in operations, buried in screens and maps, not the type anyone imagined outside the wire. Off duty, she made that impression even easier to accept. Plain black shirt, faded jeans, boots that had seen better days but were meticulously clean. No unit shirts, no loud logos, no deployment hoodies that shouted where she had been or what she had done. To most people who had seen her on base, she was that quiet Navy type from the operations building, the one you passed in the hallway, nodded to politely, and forgot by the time you hit the next doorway. When people asked what she did, she would shrug and give the same harmless answer every time. Just ops work, she would say, mostly coordination. She never raised her voice to be heard. If a conversation got crowded, she stepped back, not forward. In group briefings, she listened more than she spoke, letting others dominate the air while she watched their faces, their hands, their tells. Most chalked that up to shyness. They were wrong. At the Rusty Anchor, that quiet made her nearly invisible. The bar drew Marines like a magnet, especially on weekend nights, and Jenna chose her seat with the same care she used to choose an observation point. Back to a wall, clear line of sight to the main entrance, and at least 2 secondary exits in view. She did not think about it anymore. It was muscle memory. Every few minutes, her eyes moved without her head turning. She tracked the reflection in a beer tap behind the counter, the line at the door, the shadow of someone passing behind her, and the mirrored sunglasses hanging on a rack nearby.
She knew where the bouncers were, where the fire exit led, and how long it would take to cross the room if she had to. To anyone not looking closely, she was just bored, maybe restless. To someone who had done real work in bad places, that scanning would have looked familiar. The way her shoulders never quite slumped, the way her right foot stayed flat and ready under her chair, the way she never let both hands drift too far from the table at the same time. If anyone asked about her day, she would talk about schedules, meetings, and coordination calls. People who worked around her assumed she spent her hours pushing taskings and updating slides for someone higher up. A necessary role maybe, but not glamorous, not dangerous, not the kind of thing that earned you respect in a bar full of infantry and recon. That was part of why most underestimated her without even realizing it. There were no visible patches on her plain shirt, no subdued trident, no command coin on a chain. Her wrists were bare. Her hair was tied back in a simple knot, not in the tight regulation bun that screamed inspection, but in a way that kept it out of her eyes. No show, no story, nothing loud. Staff Sergeant Brody Kane was the opposite of quiet. He was the kind of Marine you heard before you saw. Tall, broad-shouldered, competitive in everything from pull-ups to pool games, and powered tonight by a few too many rounds. He had that mix of charm and danger some Marines carried like a second set of dog tags, a laugh that could fill a room and a temper that could empty it. Kane liked being the center of attention. On deployment, he led from the front and carried his section through some ugly nights, and he had the scars and stories to prove it. Off duty, he carried those stories into every bar he walked into, polishing them with each retelling, making sure nobody missed his part in them. People gravitated toward him. He liked that too. At his side, as usual, were Lance Corporal Tyler Briggs and Corporal Mason Rudd. Briggs was younger, wiry, always trying to keep up, the one who laughed the loudest at Kane's jokes so he would not be the target of the next one. Rudd was heavier, set, quieter, but his silence came from loyalty rather than thoughtfulness. If Kane moved, Rudd moved. If Kane laughed at someone, Rudd grinned right behind him. They had all come in together that night. Uniforms traded for civilian shirts that still somehow looked like uniforms. Their haircuts, their posture, their energy gave them away, even if their clothes did not. Within minutes, they had claimed a corner of the bar, turned it into their own little stage, and the people around them became their audience. Jenna noticed them the second they walked in. She did not stiffen, did not look away, did not roll her eyes when their laughter spiked sharper than the music. She simply added them to the quiet mental map already running in the back of her mind. 3 Marines, all buzzed, one of them a natural leader in all the wrong ways once the bottle opened.
Near the far side of the bar, Lieutenant Alex Finch watched the room as well, though for different reasons. Fresh to the command, a Navy lieutenant with clean paperwork and only a handful of real deployments, he was still learning the human terrain of his new assignment. He had seen Jenna a few times in the operations building in uniform, where she kept to the back of rooms and spoke in short, precise sentences during planning sessions. Finch knew her as Hail from Ops, the quiet one who always seemed to know where everyone was on the map. He had heard someone mention that she ran some coordination piece for a specialized task unit, but nobody gave details. In his world, that usually meant sensitive work, the kind of thing you did not casually describe over coffee. Still, he had never seen her raise her voice, never seen her pull rank, never seen anyone defer to her the way they did to certain commanding officers. Tonight, as he watched her sit alone with that untouched drink, he felt something he could not quite name. It was not pity and not attraction. It was more like curiosity mixed with a flicker of concern. There was a kind of stillness around her that did not fit the noise of the room, a calm out of place in the chaos. He saw the way her eyes moved, how she tracked the front door every time it opened, how she checked the mirror behind the bar without ever seeming to stare at it. Finch had seen that only a few times before downrange, from people who had been on the wrong end of ambushes and did not intend to be surprised again. He wondered briefly what exactly ops work meant for her. Kane, on the other hand, saw none of that. What he saw was a woman alone at a table, dressed simple, not trying to be seen. To him, that made her fair game, an easy prop for a joke, a way to pull more laughter from the Marines circling him. Someone who would either giggle and play along or flinch and walk away. Both outcomes were equally entertaining. The first time he passed her table, he made a casual comment about lonely Navy admin and kept walking, his friends laughing behind him. Jenna did not react. The second time, he paused just long enough to lean on the back of her chair and ask if she was waiting for someone brave enough to sit with her. Again, nothing. No blush, no anger, just that same calm gaze that slid over him like he was a line item on a checklist. Each time Kane circled back, the mood shifted a little more. Marines nearby started paying attention. Finch's unease grew. The air around Jenna's table felt tight, stretched thin like the seconds before a door charge blows. And still, she sat there, hands loose on the table, eyes steady, as the staff sergeant's orbit pulled closer and closer. It started small, the way most bad decisions do. On his next pass, Kane slowed beside her table and planted one hand on the back of her chair. The music thumped. The televisions over the bar flashed highlights from some old game, and his voice slid right through it all. "Did your husband leave you here?" he asked. "Or are you just auditioning for one?" A couple of Marines at the next table snorted. Someone at the bar half turned to listen, elbow on the comment, grin already forming. Jenna did not look up.
She traced the condensation ring beneath her glass with one finger, as if cataloging the pattern. Kane waited for a reaction, any reaction. When he got nothing, he leaned closer, breath heavy with whiskey and something fried from the kitchen. "You look like admin support pretending to be tough," he said. "Let me guess. Somewhere in an air-conditioned building, filing reports about people who actually do the work." This time, the laughter came quicker.
Briggs laughed too hard, too fast, like he was afraid of being the first one Kane turned on if the joke did not land. Rudd chuckled and shook his head, eyes moving between Kane and Jenna the way you watch a sparring match you are sure is one-sided. Jenna finally lifted her eyes. She did not glare, she did not sigh. She simply looked at him, meeting his gaze with a calm so even it almost felt impolite. There was a faint tightening at the corners of her eyes, not anger, not fear, just a tiny recalculation, as if she had finally decided that Kane was not just noise, but a variable that might need addressing. "I am fine where I am," she said quietly. Her voice was low, carrying just enough to be heard without straining. No apology, no explanation, no nervous laugh to soften the edges. Then she dropped her gaze again as if the conversation were over. Kane straightened, rolling his shoulders as if shedding the moment. "See that?" he said to his Marines, half turning so the crowd could hear him cold. "That is what you get when you spend too much time behind a desk." A ripple of laughter moved through the nearby tables. It was not cruel yet, not fully. It was the kind of laughter that comes from people watching something they think is harmless, a show, a bit of entertainment to go with their drinks. At the far side of the room, Finch watched over the rim of his glass. He saw the way Jenna's shoulders remained level, the way her hand stayed loose on the table instead of curling into a fist. He also saw the way Kane's body language shifted each time he came near her, less casual, more focused, like a dog circling something it did not understand but could not ignore. Finch felt a prickle of unease at the base of his neck. He knew enough about inter-service politics to understand the minefield in front of him. A Navy lieutenant stepping into a scene with a senior Marine staff sergeant off duty in a bar with alcohol involved. That kind of thing had a way of turning into a mess nobody could put back in the bottle. It could be read as disrespect, interference, or worse. Jenna moved before he could decide anything. She slid her chair back, the legs scraping once against the floor. She placed a few bills under her untouched drink and rose, pushing the chair in with deliberate care. No rush, no flinch. She picked up her phone, slipped it into her pocket, and turned toward the door. It was as simple as that. She chose to leave. Kane stepped sideways and blocked her path. He did it casually, a half step, a shift of weight, his body filling the narrow space between her and the open aisle. To anyone not paying attention, it might have looked accidental. Jenna knew better. Finch knew better. A few of the Marines who had spent enough time in tight hallways and cramped structures recognized the move instantly. "Going somewhere, admin?" Kane asked. Jenna stopped a breath away from him. She looked up, taking in his height, the set of his jaw, the way his friends hung back just enough to enjoy the view without getting in the way. The music still played, but softer now in Finch's ears. The conversations around them dipped and wavered. "I am leaving," she said. He smiled, but there was nothing kind in it. "Did I say you could?" There it was, the line that turned a bad joke into something uglier. The snickers nearby faded into a low murmur. Some people leaned back from their tables, giving themselves a little more distance while pretending they were not interested. Others shifted stools to get a better look. The bouncers exchanged glances at the far end of the bar, weighing whether this was just another loud Marine night or something headed toward trouble. Kane lifted his hand and set it around Jenna's wrist. It was not a gentle touch. His fingers closed with deliberate pressure, thumb pressing against the tendons just above the base of her palm. He squeezed enough to make a point, not enough to leave a mark. Not yet. In his mind, this was control, a message. You move when I let you. Jenna's hand stayed relaxed under his grip. Her shoulders did not tense. Her breathing did not hitch. The only thing that changed was the way her stance shifted, just barely, one foot sliding half an inch to adjust her balance. Finch saw his own knuckles whitening around his glass. The urge to intervene rose like a tide in his chest. Say something. Step in, cross the floor, and put a stop to it. He imagined walking up, introducing himself as a Navy lieutenant, asking the staff sergeant to let the woman go. He also imagined the explosion that would follow. Kane glanced at Briggs and Rudd, making sure they were watching. "Look," he said, tilting his head toward Jenna without taking his eyes off her. "Somebody forgot to brief her on how this works." Laughter came again, but it was thinner now, strained around the edges. A couple of Marines did not laugh at all. One of them stared at Jenna's face instead, taking in the flat, quiet look in her eyes. Not fear, not defiance, something else entirely. Jenna's voice, when it came, was calm enough to cut through the music. "Staff Sergeant," she said. He blinked. The way she said it was not questioning. It was a statement of fact, a precise hit on his rank delivered without a uniform in sight. Her eyes never left his. "Take your hand off my wrist," she said. "You have 1 second." She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. She simply set a boundary with the same tone a commander uses to give a final order before a breach. There was no bravado in it, just certainty. Kane's jaw flexed. He was not used to being spoken to that way by anyone off duty, much less by a woman who looked to him like support staff. The fact that she had his exact rank without a glance at a name tape made something cold flicker at the back of his mind, but the alcohol and the circle of eyes around them smothered it fast. 1 second, he repeated, his mouth curling into a smirk. "You going to time it for me?" Briggs laughed on cue. Rudd gave a low whistle. Someone at a nearby table muttered something about spicy Navy and earned a half-hearted chuckle in response. It was all theater now, and Kane was not about to walk off the stage. Instead of releasing her, he tightened his grip. He felt the tendon shift under his hand, the bones of her wrist firm but smaller than his. He expected a flinch, a wince, maybe a pullback. Any of those would have fed the moment, confirmed the power he thought he had. Instead, her expression did not change at all. Across the room, Finch rose from his chair, heart pounding harder than it should for a bar scuffle. His mind raced through options. Call the bouncers over, use his rank, pretend he knew her personally and claim her as his responsibility. Every option felt like stepping into a choke point with no clear field of fire. He had seen people like Kane before, proud, aggressive, and one bad push away from a fight they would regret later. He had also seen people like Jenna, or at least he thought he had, quiet professionals who did not show their cards until the last possible second. His instinct screamed to move. His training whispered to wait and read a little longer. Kane made the decision for everyone. He let go of a wrist, but only so he could pull his arm back. His shoulders rolled, weight shifting onto his rear foot, fist closing into a solid mass of bone and callus. It was not a slap or a shove he was winding up. It was a punch, the kind he had thrown in more than one drunken fight overseas when tempers had run too hot. Conversations around them snapped off like switches being thrown. The music kept playing, but somehow it sounded distant, like it belonged to another building, another night. Glasses stopped halfway to people's mouths. A bartender froze with a towel over one shoulder, eyes locked on the scene. Time stretched thin. Jenna watched his arm move, watched the angle of his elbow, the position of his feet, the way his hips turned into the punch. To someone else, it might have looked sudden, violent, impossible to avoid. To her, it unfolded like a slow, familiar diagram. She saw the openings, the mistakes, the consequences. Finch stood rooted to the spot, caught between the instinct to yell and the awareness that he was already too late to stop the fist in midair. In that breath, in that stretched-out second when a drunken Marine's knuckles were arcing toward the face of a quiet Navy woman who did not step back, the entire bar held one collective silent inhale.
The punch never landed. Half a heartbeat before Kane's fist could close the distance, a sharp, piercing tone cut through the music. Not the bar speakers, not a ringtone anyone picked for fun. It was mechanical, urgent, the kind of sound that made people straighten without knowing why. Jenna's phone buzzed on the table next to her abandoned drink, screen flashing with a coded alert. At the same exact moment across the bar, Finch's phone vibrated in his hand with the same pattern, the same piercing tone. Two devices, same tempo, same rhythm. Anyone who had spent enough time in the right rooms knew that was not a coincidence. Jenna's gaze flicked down and back up in a fraction of a second. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squared, spine taller, weight settling into the balls of her feet. It was subtle, but it was the difference between someone standing in a bar and someone standing in a doorway waiting for a breach call. Kane did not notice the phones, not at first. His focus was on the swing, on the eyes in the room, on the need to finish the moment he had started. His arm kept moving forward, momentum carrying it through the arc he had already committed to. What he did notice, even through the haze of alcohol and ego, was the way her eyes changed. 1 second, they were flat and calm. The next, there was something else entirely, sharper, colder, focused in a way that did not belong to a casual off-duty sailor. It was like watching someone flip a switch from standby to live. Her left hand rose, not fast, not dramatic. It slid inside his striking arm, guiding his wrist just enough to redirect the force past her shoulder instead of into her face. At the same time, her right foot slid half a step, lining up her hips with his center line. For a blink, her sleeve rode up just enough to show a pale, twisted mark on the inside of her wrist. Not a decorative scar, not the thin line of an old cut. It was irregular, rounded, the kind of burn you get when det cord or a charge goes wrong at close range. One of the Marines at the nearest table saw it and felt his chest tighten. He had seen a mark like that once before on a breacher who joked that the wall hit back harder than expected. Jenna's voice came out low, cutting through the stillness that had fallen over the bar. "Stand down," she said. 2 words, not loud, not shouted, but delivered in a tone that carried command in its bones. It was the cadence of briefings and final checks, the voice you hear in your headset just before stepping into a target building. It was not a plea, not a suggestion. It was an order. There was no way Kane should have heard it clearly over the music and the blood in his ears, but he did. For a fraction of a second, some stubborn part of his brain tried to process why those words hit harder than any insult. Pride smothered the thought before it could fully form. He pushed forward, refusing to let a few syllables and a strange look shake him. If anything, the resistance only made him angrier. His body was already committed, and his ego followed, unwilling to back down in front of half the bar. Around them, more Marines drifted closer, pulled in by the tension like metal to a magnet. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of what might happen next. Some leaned on high tops, pretending to be casual. Others folded their arms, jaws tight, knowing on some level that this was out of balance in a way that did not sit right. Finch, phone buzzing in his hand, glanced at the screen as he started forward. The message was short, coded, and left no room for misunderstanding. A recall of that precedence did not come for training. It came for nights when the world tilted sideways, and only a few people were selected to push it back. Ravenfall, immediate, no delay. He looked up and saw the same alert flashing on the screen of Jenna's phone. His throat went dry. Whatever she did in ops, it was not the kind of admin posting most people thought it was. From behind the bar, the older bartender who had been watching shook his head slowly. "Look at her stance," he murmured to no one in particular. "That look, I've only seen operators do that." The younger bartender beside him frowned, not fully understanding. To him, Jenna still looked like any other woman in a bar about to get dragged into a fight she hadn't started. But the older man had watched enough units rotate through enough bases to recognize certain things. The way she lined her hips, the way her eyes never left Kane's chest and shoulders, not his face, the economy of her movement.
Kane's knuckles sliced through empty air as she redirected his arm past her. Before he could reset his feet, before he could even curse, her hand slid up his bicep, fingers closing over a nerve point high near his shoulder. The pressure was precise, not brute force. His arm jolted, a spike of white pain shooting down to his fingertips. His fist went slack. For the first time that night, real doubt cracked through his expression. He stumbled half a step, trying to pull away, but her other foot hooked behind his ankle, unbalancing him. The motion looked almost gentle, like she was just shifting her weight. The result was anything but. His center of gravity rolled past the point of recovery. Their bodies turned with the momentum, and she let him fall.
The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. One moment, he was about to punch a quiet Navy woman. The next, he was on his back on the sticky bar floor, staring up at the ceiling, his right arm buzzing uselessly like it did when he slept on it wrong. The wind whooshed out of his chest, leaving him gasping. Jenna did not follow him down. She did not loom over him or kick him or say anything cutting to drive the point home. She simply released his arm, stepped back, and turned away as if she had just closed a door that needed closing. The crowd murmured, What did she just do? Did you see that? That was not luck. Nobody moves like that by accident. A few Marines who had been laughing earlier now exchanged uneasy glances, replaying the moment in their heads. They had seen tough people handle themselves in fights before, but this had been different. There had been no wild swing, no brawl, just a clean, efficient neutralization. Finch's pulse hammered as he looked from the message on his screen to Jenna, who was already pulling her phone from the table. He realized with a slow, creeping clarity that whatever he thought he knew about her role in ops had been a fraction of the truth.
Jenna glanced at the alert, absorbing the content in one practiced sweep. The bar, the music, the eyes on her, they all faded into background noise. Work had just called. She slid the phone back into her pocket and scanned the room once, not like a person checking for danger, but like a leader counting pieces on a board. Her expression did not change, but something unmistakable settled over her stance: purpose, direction, authority. Kane rolled onto one elbow, face flushed for more than just the impact. He stared at her, confusion and anger and a creeping thread of unease tangling behind his eyes. Part of him wanted to lunge again to reclaim whatever he thought he had lost on that floor. Another part, deeper and quieter, recognized that he had just picked a fight with something he did not understand. He pushed that quieter part down. Pride kept his mouth shut, but it also kept him from backing off. Around him, whispers built. Did you see her eyes before she moved? She timed that like she had done it 1,000 times. You think she is with one of the teams? Questions filled the space where the music used to dominate. Nobody had answers, only guesses. The older bartender, towel over his shoulder, exhaled slowly and shook his head again. Whoever she is, he said under his breath, she is not just admin. Curiosity hung over the room like static before a storm. People watched Jenna, not with the casual interest they had given her at the start of the night, but with a sharper, more cautious attention. Something was different about her, something that did not fit in the neat boxes they had placed her in only minutes before. But her name, her rank, her true role stayed unspoken. For now, all they had were hints: a scar on her wrist, a recall tone on her phone, a stance that did not belong to someone who spent their days shuffling papers. The shape of the truth was starting to form, but the full outline remained just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. Kane's body was still trying to recover from the shock of hitting the floor when his pride kicked back in. Hot and stupid, he tried to scramble up, pushing off the sticky floorboards with his good arm, breath ragged, humiliation burning through the whiskey haze. His eyes locked on Jenna like she was a target he refused to lose face to. He lunged again, not smart, not calculated, just angry. His fist came up in a messy arc, stronger than before, but even less controlled. That was the moment everyone in the bar would remember for the rest of their lives, because Jenna moved before the punch was even fully committed. To the crowd, it looked like a blur. To Jenna, it was geometry. She stepped inside the strike, pivoting her hips a fraction of an inch. His momentum carried his arm past her shoulder as she redirected it with an open palm, guiding it away from her face like clearing a curtain from a window. Her other hand shot upward, fingers closing on a nerve point at the top of his shoulder, a sharp, clinical press. Kane's right arm went dead. He gasped, more in shock than pain, confusion twisting across his face. Before he could recover, she finished the sequence with a smooth leg sweep. Her foot slid behind his ankle and she reaped the leg cleanly, folding his balance underneath him. The staff sergeant hit the floor hard. 2 seconds, maybe less.
A Marine near the pool table muttered, "What the?" and didn't finish the sentence. Another whispered, "Nobody moves like that unless," and clamped his mouth shut. Silence poured through the bar, thick and heavy. Even the music seemed distant now, like it was coming from underwater. The door bouncer took half a step forward, then froze, unsure whether he had just witnessed self-defense or something far above his pay grade. Jenna didn't look triumphant. She didn't even look irritated. She didn't speak. No victory stance, no one-liner, no glare at the man groaning on the floor. The moment he was neutralized, he stopped mattering. She simply turned away from him, calm as ever, as though she had just closed a cabinet rather than dropped a Marine twice her size. Her hand slipped into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The recall message glowed across the screen, cold, precise, unmistakable. Finch, halfway across the room, lifted his own phone with the same alert, eyes widening. Jenna didn't breathe faster. She didn't rush. She just absorbed the content in a single long blink, like someone mentally rotating a puzzle piece into place. Then she moved, quiet, purposeful, without a flicker of hesitation. She walked past Kane, who was still on the floor, clutching his useless arm, and didn't spare him a glance. Not out of cruelty, but out of irrelevance. Whatever he thought he controlled minutes ago was gone now, blown apart by the simple fact that he was no longer the most dangerous person in the room. Finch was already heading toward the exit, weaving through the stunned crowd, his posture saying everything. The call wasn't optional, not for him, not for her, not for anyone cleared for that level of urgency. Curiosity rippled through the bar as Jenna slipped her phone into her pocket and stepped toward the door. Kane watched her with wide, disbelieving eyes, like reality had fractured into something he couldn't make sense of. His humiliation wasn't just from the takedown. It was from the realization that he hadn't even been the focus of her attention. He wasn't her problem. He was barely a footnote. As she crossed the last few tables, one Marine who had gotten close enough to glimpse her screen whispered the word he saw before she locked the device. Ravenfall. It wasn't loud, but it spread fast. One whispered echo passing through the room in a chain reaction. Ravenfall? No way, that's not a training code. Few in the bar understood the meaning, but the ones who did went pale. That code didn't belong to regular commands or even high-level maybe assets. It belonged to the kind of operations whispered about only in vault-secured rooms. A bartender stared at her leaving silhouette and whispered almost reverently, "She's on recall for that? What the hell is she?" Jenna didn't stop to confirm or deny. She pushed the door open and stepped into the night air, the faint hum of engines and distant ocean wind brushing against her. Finch was already outside waiting, understanding the urgency, but not yet understanding her. Behind them, in the doorway's fading light, Kane remained on the floor, caught between rage, confusion, and something dangerously close to fear. His breath came shallow, his mind racing faster than his body could catch up. He had swung at her, he had tried to grab her, he had mocked her, blocked her, challenged her, and she had walked away without even looking back. Because he wasn't important, not compared to whatever Ravenfall meant, not compared to who she truly was. He had no idea who Jenna Hale really was, but he was about to find out.
Marines from the quick reaction element were already sprinting through the corridors when Kane arrived at the operations center, cradling his limp right arm against his chest. The nerve strike still burned in strange pulses, fingers tingling uselessly. He tried to hide the pain, but every Marine they passed gave him a look, part confusion, part curiosity, part suspicion. Inside the operations center, the temperature felt 10 degrees cooler. Screens glowed along the walls, satellite feeds updating in rapid flashes, encrypted messages scrolling down columns of data. Officers moved quickly, their voices low, clipped, urgent. No one was lounging, no one was joking. This was a room where careers were made or broken in minutes. Kane took a spot near the back with Briggs and Rudd. Even they were quiet now, eyes darting across the controlled chaos. They all felt it. This wasn't some routine alert. Then the room shifted. Jenna Hale walked in. Not in jeans, not in a plain black shirt. Not looking like the quiet woman sitting alone in a bar. She stepped through the doors in full operational uniform. Combat top fitted cleanly, sleeves rolled with perfect precision, gear already strapped on, hair tied back with not a strand out of place. Every movement was clean, controlled, and sharp. The chatter in the room dipped without anyone saying a word. A couple of Marines stiffened instinctively, eyes widening as they recognized the way she carried herself. This was not someone who ran admin. This was someone who ran missions. Then the room shifted. Jenna Hale walked in. Not in jeans, not in a plain black shirt. Not looking like the quiet woman sitting alone in a bar. She stepped through the doors in full operational uniform.
Combat top fitted cleanly, sleeves rolled with perfect precision, gear already strapped on, hair tied back with not a strand out of place. Every movement was clean, controlled, and sharp. The chatter in the room dipped without anyone saying a word. A couple of Marines stiffened instinctively, eyes widening as they recognized the way she carried herself. This was not someone who ran admin. This was someone who ran missions. She turned toward the Marine group. "Staff Sergeant Kane," she said. Every Marine in the room seemed to inhale at the same time. Kane froze, blood turning to ice. He waited for the humiliation, the reprimand, the warning about conduct. He braced for a public dressing down that would follow him for the rest of his career. But Jenna didn't bring up the bar. She didn't bring up the fight. She didn't bring up the fact that he had thrown a punch at a commander. Instead, she spoke cleanly, professionally, as if nothing had happened at all. "Your Marines will hold the eastern corridor. You're the blocking force. If the enemy presses that side, you maintain position until my signal." Kane blinked, stunned. She trusted him, trusted the same man who had tried to swing at her an hour earlier. "Yes, ma'am," he said, voice cracking before he could steady it. "Understood." A quiet nod from her, nothing more, and somehow that cut deeper than any reprimand would have. The mission moved fast. Ghost hawks sliced through the night sky, rotors whispering over the desert. Finch established overwatch from the ridgeline, calling out movement through his scope. Jenna and her SEALs ghosted through the west breach, clearing rooms with silent precision. Within minutes, the compound lit with gunfire. On the eastern corridor, Kane's Marines took the first wave. Rounds cracked against the rocks, dirt kicked up around their boots. A machine gun jammed. Briggs screamed a warning. Rudd nearly got flanked before Kane dragged him behind a broken wall. The pressure tightened. The enemy surged harder. Their lines started to buckle. "Shadow Actual, this is QRF East," Kane shouted over comms, voice ragged. "We're taking heavy contact, multiple shooters holding, but—" Before he could finish, a new voice slid into the comms, calm, controlled, unshaken. "Hold your position, Staff Sergeant. We're moving to you." A heartbeat later, muzzle flashes broke through the darkness. Jenna emerged with her team like a blade sliding clean from a sheath, silent, fast, surgical. Her operators moved with lethal efficiency, dropping targets before they could adjust. She flowed from cover to cover with an ease that made the firefight look choreographed. No shouting, no chaos, just mastery. Kane watched, breath trapped in his chest. She didn't bark orders. She didn't scream threats. She didn't command fear. She commanded precision. Within moments, the corridor stabilized. "Shadow Actual, exfil window open," Finch called. "Birds inbound." Jenna lifted a hand, signaling her team forward. "Move," she said simply. "QRF on us." Kane and his Marines followed, shaken, humbled, wordless. The rotors of the Ghost Hawks kicked up dust as the exfil zone came into view. Her SEALs boarded first, securing the target. Then she turned back, covering the last stretch with quick, controlled bursts. Kane realized something then. She was always the final one out, always the last pair of boots leaving danger. A commander in every sense of the word. She reached the landing zone and moved past Kane without slowing. He snapped to attention instinctively, arms still useless in the sling, breath uneven. "Commander Hale, ma'am," he stammered. "Earlier, I didn't know who you... I just..." The apology tangled in his throat. She paused, turned. For the first time, she looked directly at him. Not with anger, not with judgment, but with a steady, unreadable calm. A single nod. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness. She didn't owe him that. Not approval. He hadn't earned it. Just a quiet confirmation that he understood now. That was enough. Behind Kane, his Marines straightened unconsciously, their faces solemn, humbled by what they had seen. No jokes, No whispers, only silence. The respectful kind that rises when men witness something they cannot ignore. Shadow Actual walked past them toward the aircraft, the desert wind catching her gear as she stepped into the open bay. And for the first time in his life, Brody Kane felt genuine reverence. Not for a rank, not for a title, but for a warrior who needed neither noise nor recognition to command the entire battlefield.
The armory was quiet when Finch found her, the kind of silence that settles after a long night. Machines cooling, dust drifting, the faint echo of boots long gone. Jenna sat at a metal bench, the soft clink of weapon parts the only movement in the still room. Her sleeves were rolled up, hands steady as she wiped carbon from the slide of her sidearm. Finch hesitated in the doorway before stepping in. She didn't look up. "You're awake early," he said, trying to sound lighter than he felt. "So are you." Jenna gave a small, almost amused exhale. "Work doesn't end when the birds land." Finch stopped a few feet away, unsure whether to sit or stand. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just honest. Eventually, he cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "about the bar." She kept cleaning, methodical and deliberate. "What about it?" He swallowed. "I saw what was happening. I should have stepped in earlier. I hesitated. I froze." Jenna slid the weapon frame aside and finally met his eyes. Her gaze wasn't sharp or disappointed, just steady. "You observed," she said. "You assessed. You waited for the moment where stepping in would help, not escalate." She wiped a final streak of oil from the slide before adding, "That's tactical patience, Lieutenant, not hesitation." Finch frowned slightly, the guilt still sitting heavy. It felt like hesitation. Jenna shook her head once. "There's a difference. Anyone can jump into a fight they don't understand. It takes discipline to hold position until you know your role." He absorbed that, the words settling deeper than he expected. He had replayed the scene a dozen times since the bar, each version filled with imagined lines he could have said, ways he might have prevented the escalation. Hearing her reframe it unknotted something inside him. She picked up her pistol again, reassembling it with the ease of muscle memory. "Strength isn't volume, Finch," she said softly. "It's control." The armory lights hummed overhead as her words lingered. Outside, the first hints of dawn began pushing through the thin windows, soft pink light crawling over the mountains, touching the steel racks of rifles and gear with a muted glow. Finch watched her for another moment, noting the way she worked, calm, unhurried, centered. She wasn't celebrating a flawless mission or brooding over the earlier confrontation. She was simply resetting, preparing for whatever came next. He understood then why people followed her. Not because she demanded it, not because of her rank or her title or the myth whispered around the teams, but because she knew exactly who she was, whether anyone was watching or not. As the sun crept higher, casting long slivers of gold across the armory floor, Finch finally understood the unspoken truth she lived by. Some of the strongest warriors you'll ever meet speak softly, move quietly, and never ask to be seen. There are moments in military life that never make headlines, never become part of official reports, and never echo beyond the walls where they unfold. Yet, these moments are where true character shows itself. Quiet strength earns respect, and the kind of courage that doesn't need an audience to exist. Jenna Hale never raised her voice, never demanded recognition, and never sought to prove herself. She simply chose discipline over ego, mission over pride, and excellence over noise. And in doing so, she reminded every Marine and sailor who crossed her path that real power is often the kind you don't see coming. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.